Well, good morning. Good morning. I feel like we should vote on something, but we're not going to do that. My name is Jonathan Zittrain, and on behalf of the Harvard Kennedy School's Institute of Politics, the university's Berkman Center for Internet and Society, and the Internet Association, I am delighted to welcome everybody, both here and in the virtual world, because, warning, we are live streaming right now. We are live streaming, at least as far as I know. I would give the URL, but if you're on the live stream, you already know it. And if you're here, you don't need it. We are also being recorded for posterity. Our good friends and neighbors at C-SPAN, Cable Span, C-SPAN will be putting this up against the Friday night battle between the House of Representatives Subcommittee on Veterans Affairs and a briefing at the Treasury Department. And I think we're looking pretty good. So just be aware, we are broadcasting. But we are located here in the Malkin Penthouse, the lovely 5th floor of the Kennedy School, named after John F. Kennedy. And the Institute of Politics here has been from the start designed to inspire and support the political aspirations and public service of young people, something that President Kennedy was also well known for. Who can forget his speech, "App not what you can do for yourself, but app what you can do for your country," and how prescient and far-seeing it was to see the role of coding and the app ecosystem for the future of the country and the world. This morning will unfold as two panels. I'll be moderating the first one on, quote, "Will the government break the internet?" Betteridge's law of headlines says the answer to any question in a headline is no, but we will have to investigate. And then we'll have at 11 o'clock a second panel moderated by Nico Mele on why internet policy matters. So this is a really rare and special opportunity to gather the amazing group of people we have around the table here today. We hope in our limited time to make the most of it. And before we start our first panel, I'm very pleased to turn the mic over to Michael Beckerman from the Internet Association. Michael?
Thank you. Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks to Harvard's Institute of Politics and Berkman Center for partnering with us on this important symposium. We are going to ask the question, will the government break the internet? I agree with you. I hope the answer is no. But the policy issues that we are going to talk about today, from ECPA reform to privacy to government surveillance, internet governance, anti-SLAPP, and net neutrality, are very important to the future of the internet and matters to all of the internet companies, internet users around the world. These are important policy issues that, as we get into an election cycle, that voters care about, and certainly for all the businesses they care about. And so looking forward to a great conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time to moderate.
A pleasure. All right, so I'm now going to take off the introducer's hat, put on the moderator's hat, which means I'm going to get up and find a way to get into the middle of the well so that I can look accusatorily at people. So this is where we need Jeopardy music or something. Let's see if this will work. All right, so hello, everybody. As you may have noticed, to call this a panel is generous. This is a round table that has right angles. And if I do my calculations right, with approximately 25 people on the panel and roughly 85 minutes to do it, introductions alone would not be done before the time was done. So we have a special configuration here, and I want to use it to our advantage rather than our disadvantage. And here's how I suggest we do it. First, to bear in mind, to adopt the ideal as we proceed, that we are speaking for posterity. Don't forget, C-SPAN is recording this. So imagine that 20 years from now, when people have jetpacks and Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom's super intelligent AI has taken over, and in a book, spoiler alert, that he just came out with, it doesn't look good for us. But they'll be looking back nostalgically at 2014. Maybe the names of the companies will have changed. Maybe the configuration of the network will have changed. But I urge us, as we discuss, to think about what we would be saying to somebody in the future about the issues we're facing now. I think that may keep us at the right level of importance for what we want to say. And it also lets us, gives you license to explain a little bit an issue that among many people here who are in dealing with governments all the time on this, who maybe represent government, we have shorthands for all sorts of things. To be able to unpack those shorthands so that there's a little bit of a translation available for others, I think would be quite good. That also means, since we're not going to do introductions around the table, when you first speak up, feel free to introduce yourself and do an extra beat. Don't just say, I'm from eBay. Say eBay, which you may remember as whatever it is that eBay does. I can swear I was logged into it recently. Todd, well, you'll explain the complexities of eBay when the time comes. Electronic Bay, I understand it to mean, or maybe not.
No, technically it was Echo Bay.
Echo Bay.
But it had already been taken, the URL.
We've already learned something. And where's Echo Bay today? Crushed by Nick Bostrom's super intelligence. So an extra beat on the introduction. And then the one other guideline I'd give, given this format, is this is crazy, but often, especially it seems to me in government affairs, our points are usually 3 in number. And I would like to adjust that to 1. Give or take. Now, I guess if you have 0 points, that's not good. So how about just 1? Figure on 1 thing with an elaboration, and we can keep the conversation, because it will be a conversation, flowing rather than sort of, and there are 3 different reasons for that. And it reminds me of another thing someone said 20 minutes ago that will make it harder to follow. Sound good? Yes? And as Michael hinted, we actually have sort of a McLaughlin Group-esque, how's that for dating the panel? A McLaughlin Group-esque set of issues we want to work through, and I won't keep them hidden. We're going to talk a little bit about intermediary liability, about surveillance, both public and private, about net neutrality, which appears to be in the news these days, and about, finally, net governance, the thicket from which there is no return. So I hope to be able to touch and integrate across all of them. So let's just jump right in. I want to think a little bit about the category of so-called intermediary liability, which I understand to mean governments often directly regulate people, but at other times they realize don't regulate people, regulate anybody or any institution in between the government and the people, put mandates there, and then you can still effectuate regulation, and possibly in a more subtle and powerful way. And we've seen examples of that in copyright infringement, in defamation, and as the internet has grown from the early 90s, in the American context, we've seen some balance struck, good or bad, in what government may or may not require of intermediaries. So really, I guess, one example of that boiling over right now is coming from Europe with a newly recognized right to be forgotten. And Adam, where are you?
Here.
I don't know why it occurred to me, Adam Kovacevic, to ask you first to weigh in on the right to be forgotten. But tell us what company you're from and how's it going?
Sure. I'm Adam Kovacevic. I lead Google's U.S. public policy efforts. Google is a search engine company that does was a search engine company that did a lot of really great things. Humble. So the right to be forgotten is an interesting, I think, issue that I think it's one of the things, I think a lot of us probably here in the U.S. look at the ruling of this European Court of Justice and think this is, outside the bounds, certainly not something probably that would gain traction here in the U.S. due to our First Amendment and strong intermediary liability principles. But I think it is important probably to acknowledge some of the feelings that motivate the desire for a right to be forgotten. The fact is there is more information about all of us online than ever before. And that is true. A lot of the search costs for finding information that used to be hard to find have been obliterated. It used to be that you could find information about a person's criminal record by going to the basement of City Hall. The internet has obliterated that in a lot of positive ways. But the fact is that people are concerned about the impact. I think one of the things that concerns me about the discussion about the right to be forgotten is it has not been
that balanced with some of the other competing values, such as primarily the values of free expression and the benefit of the consumer's right to know, particularly about things like whether a vendor has had bad reviews against them, whether a potential babysitter has had criminal things. These are the things that people could actually request to be removed from search results, and I think that's potentially very anti-consumer.
So Adam, does this represent a shift in 2014 in thinking with Google from a stance that used to say, we index the internet. If you have a problem with that, please consult the internet,
right,
to a stance that says, there's a lot of tricky things to balance here. We may have quibbles with a privately activated process where a person is to come to Google, fill out a form, get a decision, and maybe a link goes down between the person and the information. But this is a new reality. There's a lot more stuff online. Is that the shift?
I think that's right. I think the reality is that, and one of the reasons why the court case in Europe is has been heavily dissected. In some ways, it hinges on whether Google is more like a data processor, which the court ruled that it is, or whether it's more like a newspaper or a journalistic organization, which we are showing some kind of prioritization, which of course we are in search results. That's the value of search results. But the reality is, I think Google's search results do both index the web, but also have this function of saying we believe that these results are more important to the user than other results. So.
Last question on the mechanics of it. How's it going? Just give us a sense of the flow coming after the opinion came down. And are there plans to open it up voluntarily to other citizens? Because I have a small list in my pocket of things I'd like to hand you, if so.
We've received probably on the order of 100,000 requests. We have a backlog of requests. We have to go through these, one by one.
Are there jobs posted for Google right to be forgotten processors? Can I do that?
There aren't, as far as I'm aware. Unfortunately, some of the cases we've seen have been, former politicians asking to have news of their criminal convictions removed. Right?
Yes.
These things are, in our view, not in the public interest. I think one of the things we are monitoring is there is some interest in the part of regulators and policymakers in places like Latin America and other parts of Asia in the European right to be forgotten, and looking at that as saying, well, is this something we should consider for our own? That concerns us, obviously.
But you're so far only limiting this right to where it is required of you to implement.
That's right, only to European citizens, only within our European domain.
And only in European portals of Google.
That's right, European version, localized European versions of Google.
Which does mean that if I'm in Britain and I'm alert enough to say I'd like google.com, I can perform a search.
That's right,
as if I'm
and that's been an area of contention, too.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Are there other companies at the table that are watching this very closely? If you're not a search engine, is right to be forgotten implicating what you do either now or potentially in the future? It's remarkably quiet. This is a Google and search engine specific thing? Wow. Brad? I thought I saw a hand go up.
No, you didn't. But I mean,
feel
I think
free to introduce yourself.
Fair enough. Brad Young. I'm senior counsel at TripAdvisor, which at one point in time was the world's largest travel site. We focused primarily on user reviews of hotels, restaurants, and attractions around the world. At one point in time is now, but I'm speaking to
I know, I respect that.
I mean, it would be disingenuous to say that we are not watching with interest how everything unfolds. Obviously, we've looked at the European Court of Justice's decision, and we've seen how Google has reacted to it. There's also a proposed directive that's currently before the EU that we don't know whether it will be enacted or not, and if so, what form it will take, and if it is, how each member country of the EU will then implement that directive. In our view, and speaking just for TripAdvisor, the decision really raises more questions than it answers, I think, right? It's who's a data processor, who falls into the news exception. What is irrelevant? Who decides what is irrelevant?
At the moment, Google, subject to appeal, should Google end up not allowing the intervention by the complainant?
Right. Matters of public interest, right? I mean, where's that line drawn? A politician is one thing.
Yeah.
A B&B owner providing poor service to his paying customers of the public. Where does that fall in the line? So there's a lot of open questions that I think.
Well, so let me ask you though. Adam was saying, look, it's 2014. It's not as simple as it's the internet, deal with it. There are lots of equities to be balanced, and there's plenty to quibble with a given mandate, but this is the new reality. Is there a similar thing going on in that class of sites like TripAdvisor that affirmatively solicit reviews and other information from people that might make institutions, I can imagine it would make or break a hotel if it gets a certain ranking or review. Is it your view that this generally gets sorted out and TripAdvisor's commitment to its users will have the right things happen, or are there ways in which it could go awry?
I think each individual platform probably definitely has the algorithms, the rules, and the ethos really that it's running under at a given time and that its community comes to expect. Those are always evolving for sure, but there's a question. I don't know at what point in time you want the government determining, you know what, TripAdvisor, those hotel reviews from 3 years ago, at this point, those are irrelevant. If
They are irrelevant.
If somebody's
They were
asked them
prior
down,
owners.
take them down.
We got rid of the cockroaches. The prior owners were
Right.
they're in jail.
Yep.
TripAdvisor, those should all be cleansed.
So-
how would I do that through just a contact us form, like good
Yes,
luck at TripAdvisor.com?
absolutely. At TripAdvisor, there are certain situations where we will remove
Yep.
a large amount of reviews. Change of ownership being the most common one.
Yes.
Major renovations, right? You just put on 3 new wings and bring in new management. It's probably gonna be a different experience for the consumer, but there are judgments. I mean, we've made some lines that work for our users.
And are those judgments made according to your conscience and what makes for a good business, or is there a shadow of government intervention if you should do that wrong?
No, not at all.
I don't know if your lawyer's at the table.
He is. He's sitting right here, and we've got another one sitting over there. Those are made for what's best for the community, right? The larger the volume, the more experiences that you're able to offer
Yes.
up to someone who's trying to figure out what to expect when they take their time off and spend their
Yes.
hard money and take their kids somewhere.
Yes.
The larger the quantity is very
Yes.
helpful. And so we've determined there are certain things that, you make those moves, you change
Yes.
ownership, blah, blah, blah. At this point in time, all those old ones, they are actually irrelevant, and maybe they
Yes.
should be forgotten, and we should start afresh. But in certain situations, you put new linens on your beds, we're gonna go ahead and leave all the reviews up about the restaurant downstairs and the front desk. That's not changing everything.
Got it. Any other thoughts on right to be forgotten before we move along? I can't tell if it's because it's totally uncontroversial or because it's totally controversial. And we're just hoping to get away with not saying anything that will have the baleful eye of Sauron, i.e.
John,
the European
John, I just
Commission.
want to add one more thing, which
Yeah.
I think that this is not going to go away as an issue.
Yes.
The debate about the European data protection regulations, Brad said,
Yes.
will be kind of the next venue where this takes place. We have a precedent in the U.S. under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, where we say that information should be used, in this case, bankruptcy or foreclosure, negative financial information, but that it can't be used against somebody past 10 years. So, we've made a judgment through legislation in this country that type of information has a expiration date.
If it is in the hands of a big credit reporting
Right,
firm.
exactly. No, so
Right.
we acknowledge that
Yeah.
there's some value in the meantime,
Yes.
but we don't want it to be held against each other, a person forever.
Yes.
And I think that we're probably going to have to weigh a lot of these things legislatively about sort of how we feel a person's history, how long it ought to follow them for certain types of information. We already make that judgment around criminal matters, right? We require sex offenders to register. They're going to be on a map. They're going to be on a registry forever. On the other hand, you look at countries like France who believe that, any crime should basically be sort of expunged from your record once you've done your time. They want people to have a clean slate.
Yes.
So we've made these judgments, and I think we're going to need to make these judgments, but probably legislatively.
Of course, it's easier to do when the information in question is in the hands of the government deciding when and how to release it. Once it's in the public domain, of course, much harder to effectuate putting that genie back in the bottle. Your prediction, 5-10 years from now, will there be an American right to be forgotten, recognized either legislatively or as a matter of customer service with the likes of Google?
I don't think there will be a right to be forgotten on the scale as this court has implemented. I think there will be sort of miniature laws and other steps taken to address particular types of information.
Uh-huh. On intermediary liability more broadly, how are things going around now? Are some of the concordats that in American law date again from before the year 2000, before the modern web and before many of the companies here were up and running, are those holding up well? I guess I think I have in mind defamation and other state law claims that somebody might bring, often involving an intermediary. Those tend to be off the table through the Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, the only remaining piece of the Communications Decency Act that the Supreme Court did not strike down. And we see correspondingly Section 512 of the Copyright Act, which encourages and then immunizes intermediaries in many circumstances against copyright infringement claims, even if their site is the way in which the infringement is happening, so long as they expeditiously take stuff down when asked. Is that holding up well? Is there any ask that anybody at this table would have to tweak that regime in America, one way or the other? This is the most wonderfully... All right, Todd, tell us where you're from.
Todd Cohn with eBay. We engage in internet commerce and also do payments through PayPal and have a small company called StubHub for ticket sales. And it goes to your point, Jonathan, about the Communications Decency Act and whether the government break the internet. And if you look and had it become not ruled unconstitutional other than Section 230, we would have all said today that the internet had been broken at that time, in particular on free expression and the openness. So what's the irony of Section 230 was a law that was meant to actually limit speech on the web ended up being one of the greatest proponents and
Yes.
pieces. So part of this is governments act in ways that don't necessarily, the sponsors of those bills don't expect them to come out the way that it came out. I don't think you could get anywhere close to passing anything like a Section 230 in the US or anywhere else around the world. But as the far end of the pendulum, it at least allows everybody to start from a position of, we're going to work to keep openness as the basic principle, and then work back from there with exceptions and all of the different
So
limitations.
it sounds to me like you're saying, Congress, keep up the good work. That's just to put you on the record.
Correct.
Thank you so much for your enlightened legislation in the internet area.
Senator James Exon of Nebraska ended up being a visionary, which he never expected to be.
Yes. And as you were saying, you can layer on acceptable use policies, things that in the company's judgment may, I guess there are auctions on eBay that are prohibited.
Sure, and that's been from day one also, right? That was part of the protection that Section 230 and Section 512 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act provide is the ability for companies to also exercise judgment and to get rid of things that they believe are in their consumers' interest.
And when there's been a real conflict in commerce, for example, a number of Schmolex watches going up for sale on eBay and the Rolex company having a small litter of kittens over that and saying you need to take these down and faster and don't even wait for us to ask. Does that feel more or less settled now? Everybody, if not happy?
I'd say that the great copyright and trademark wars over the internet are not settled because there's always the ability for people to continually push the envelope. But I'd say in general, for the vast majority of commerce, it's a much better situation than it had been.
Uh-huh.
So I think that there's no reason to reopen the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and globally, most countries have adopted similar, either formally through law or informally through common law or by statute or regulation.
Uh-huh. Seth Calvert, can I ask you to weigh in on this?
Sure. So I'm also with a company that called TripAdvisor that used to do a lot of online reviews. Intermediary liability is an issue that we we confront relatively regularly. And I would say, look, I think I would agree with Todd in that as the state of it is today in the U.S., 230 is a terrific bulwark to our business model and to many of the businesses that are here today. It is, from time to time under threat, and you can
Yes.
see there's a group of a number of the state AGs a year or two ago did try to
Yes.
claw back some of those restrictions. I think in Europe, it's a little bit more unsettled in terms of the regularity and sort of the rules of the road there,
Yes.
and it is a less, I think, friendly environment for the intermediaries.
So there is, at this point, as Todd was suggesting, nothing in particular you would ask of the government, and nothing in this area that you are particularly fearing it will do?
On the U.S. side,
Yeah.
no.
Internationally,
I think internationally,
Yeah.
I think clarity. Look, I mean, the big ask would be something along the lines of what 230 looks like. Although I think, as to Todd's point, I think
yes.
unlikely that would have been passed today. 230. Similarly, it may be a very difficult road
Yes.
to get something like that passed internationally.
Yes. Matt Lira, maybe I can ask you, tell us where you're from?
I'm currently at the National Republican Senatorial Committee, and prior to that, I was in the House Majority Leader's office.
And you should define what the Republican Party is?
Yeah, well, the Republican Party, the Republican Party over the last 20 years has had an amazing resurgence and has led America to great golden age, as we all know in 2030.
And how much would an issue like the one we were just talking about be on the radar, whether for a campaign or for policy making, or is this kind of in the weeds?
I think presently today it's an issue that's largely in the weeds, which is to the benefit of the tech industry as a whole. I think tech policy is an area of remarkable consensus, more or less, as we've seen in recent policy debates on the Hill, there are issues that are forming unusual coalitions. So it's the kind of issues where you'll have Darrell Issa working with Jared Polis and these kinds of,
Yes.
and that's to the benefit, in my view, of the tech industry, that it doesn't become overly aligned with either political party.
Yeah.
I think as you zoom out the lens on the issues of like the right to be forgotten and these other issues, within the construct of how you set up this roundtable and you say, what's the perspective in the future?
Yes.
I think there's an inevitable shift as society itself changes their perspectives as so-called digital natives, enter their 30s and 40s and 50s, and just frankly have a different view on things like, social posts, search information, and the rest. That perhaps the baby boomer generation who, were sort of digital immigrants, if you will,
Yes.
Perhaps will be more concerned about some of those issues than digital natives will be ultimately in the end.
Let me throw a.
Jonathan, can I just?
Oh, yeah.
A second?
Yeah,
We're
sure.
hearing that the live stream people aren't hearing you, so.
They are not
something
hearing
wrong. Not hearing the
Oh,
panel.
I see.
So if you
That's
pull the
okay.
mics close to you.
Apologies to the live stream for the distance of the mics. Got it. Let me ask a question, knowing we have a good friend from Facebook at the table, do
Right
we
here?
not?
Yeah, sir.
So, all right, so here's just a quick question. Suppose we have some form of unrest, a la Ferguson, in the past few weeks, and there are posts on Facebook about it, and Facebook has an opportunity, in the interest of public safety, to decide whether to subordinate posts that say something like, let's meet at the corner of X and Y and really show our rage. Maybe Facebook can say, well, we'll escalate a little bit video of a cat.
They might do that. They might do that anyway. So.
Yeah. So before I ask you if a problem with it, let me turn to Joel Kaplan of all people, so that he may express his outrage for the record that I've even asked the question. Joel, over to you.
Yes, I'm just recovering from shock that my friend Matt would suggest that. Joel Kaplan, I am the Vice President for U.S. Public Policy for Facebook, which was a small startup social network with a goal of connecting the world, and hopefully by 2024 we'll achieve that.
Yes.
So it's a great question, and I think it does it extends out the conversation about intermediary liability that you
Exactly
were
right.
having,
I see,
in a way that I think touches on some of the broader issues that we see, not necessarily in the United States. I think I agree with the earlier comments that U.S. law is actually pretty good as a result
Yes.
of Section 230 and other efforts. But we do see in other places around the world efforts to hold internet companies responsible for the content of the people who are posting it, user-generated content. And one of the places where that manifests itself, or situations where it manifests itself, is when the citizens are using the internet, not just Facebook but other sites, to communicate their dissatisfaction and potentially their plans for meeting, and that can turn into unrest, and that's something you see governments around the world, I think, very conscious of and increasingly conscious of after the Arab Spring in 2011.
So right now, what's your baseline way of dealing with that? Is it analogous to Adam's original, as Google's original view of it's the internet? If you have a problem with it, go to somebody else. With Facebook, say, look, we have a secret sauce that organizes what posts rise to the feed. We don't tweak it so much. It does what it does. Don't blame us. Or is there license reserved to do exactly that in the interests of the customers of the public good?
Yeah, I actually think you're conflating two issues, which understandably how the algorithm for newsfeed operates, and whether Facebook will be responsive to a government that wants to crack down on dissent.
You're right. And so let's talk about the first one first, which is wholly in the absence of government wanting to do anything.
Yeah.
With Facebook on its own, the way that TripAdvisor might decide that there's been a change in ownership, we're going to make a change to our algorithm that might otherwise show a review, we're not going to show that. Is there a concomitant thing? I mean, there's an acceptable use policy. How?
Well, look, so the algorithm that Facebook uses to determine what to show in an individual's newsfeed is based on our effort to show that individual the information we think is most relevant and interesting to that person. And that is a constantly evolving determination, taking into consideration lots and lots of factors.
Yes.
So I don't really view that as Facebook's. I don't think Facebook would view that as its responsibility to determine what the people who are using its service ought to see. Now it's just
written into my oath as a law professor to ask the hypothetical follow-up. There's some video from the Islamic State that other users of Facebook subscribing to the ideals of the Islamic State want to see. You're going to reserve the right to intercede?
Right. So again, I'm trying to disaggregate the question of how often to show it in the algorithm from what can actually be seen on the site. Period.
I see.
And it is the case. It is the case that Facebook has community standards, and for the most part, our goal and our mission is to advance free expression, and so we try to have as light a touch as possible in determining what can be seen on our site. But we do have community standards that exclude some content, and mostly that's stuff that we view as causing direct harm. So if somebody is directly inciting violence on our site, that's precluded under our community standards.
And what I hear you saying is it's on-off. If it's not meeting the standards, if it's inciting violence, it's not that it gets pushed down in the feed or something, it's just gone.
Right. If it violates our community standards of inciting violence or otherwise causing direct harm, and those things are laid out in our standards, then it'll be precluded from being on our site. The way we enforce that is through a reporting mechanism. So we don't in most instances we're not affirmatively going out to police that. We're waiting for one of our users to report something that violates it.
You wouldn't use the feed algorithm as a remedy. You would only use block it or not block it, take it down, leave it up.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, you had said there was a second point about government and what it might demand. And Facebook, of course, is a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah, so we're obviously a global service, and we have to abide by the laws of the countries in which we operate.
Yes.
And so, in addition to our community standards, basically, we will respond to demands from government if they conform to the laws of that country. Now, we won't typically take something off of our site if we think it doesn't violate our community standards, but we may IP block it in the jurisdiction of the area that has it against the law.
Roughly, but not exactly analogous to Google implementing a right to be forgotten within the European portals, but not elsewhere. And
Yeah.
then the user will see a message that says, this
Right.
is not available
And
in your...
one of the things we've done, as have a number of the companies around the table, is to begin publishing transparency reports or government request reports, the purpose of which is to share with our users the number of circumstances in which their government has asked us to take something down. And that gives the people who use our service a way of understanding the extent to which their government or some other government is insisting that content be precluded from
Yeah.
being seen.
Yes.
Can I jump in, actually?
Yeah,
if you
sure.
don't mind?
Macon.
Yeah, my name's Macon Phillips. I work for the U.S. government. That used to be the organization that governed the United States before the great Facebook Google
How many
merger.
users does the U.S. government have?
No, I work at the State Department now. I joined it about a year ago, and prior to that, I worked at the White House after the president was elected in 2008. And it occurs to me that I'm in a room with people who can answer this question that I've had for a few years now. And hearing Matt talk about how tech policy is in the weeds right now, and that's a good thing, I think, for the debate in D.C. I recall the great SOPA-PIPA debate of, I guess, 2011 or whenever that was. And being in the White House and seeing this issue develop and how rapidly it developed in the public space once the internet companies started talking about it to their users.
Yes.
And as someone who has spent a few years in internet advocacy and just advocacy generally,
Yes.
it was something I've never seen before, to go from 5 miles an hour to 100 miles an hour. Once Google put a link on its page, once Wikipedia had the link at the top. And it occurred to me that these large sort of membership-based organizations that can rapidly communicate to millions of people and frame an issue for people who had no idea what it was before they saw it on this page have this great new power that can be, used to
Yes.
advocate for policy
Yes.
positions
Yes.
when it's presented to people as in their interest by companies who,
Yes.
let's admit it, are companies, so they're advocating for their corporate interest, even though they say they're, always looking at the customer first, and I think that's
Yes.
good. But being on the receiving side of it, it was remarkable to me to see the power that these large internet companies have when they decide to present an issue to regular people.
So is there a question you want to ask?
So the
of
question
someone?
was,
Yes, regarding
as
this.
the people who are probably making those decisions of, are we
Yes.
okay talking about this to our users? How do we want to talk about this to the users? When we talk about our transparency reports, do we want to tell people how they could, express their views on whether they like this or not? How do you evaluate your responsibility of encouraging advocacy, or do you just put it out there and try to steer clear most of the time?
I thought we had somebody here from Reddit. Maybe that's on the second panel? Second panel. So, okay, we have a campaign manager from Reddit. But
I'll jump in.
Michael, did you want to
Yeah,
speak to
sure.
that? I guess because you're often rallying the troops who are rallying the users.
Yeah, so Michael Beckerman with the Internet Association. We're a public policy trade association representing the internet companies, many of whom are at the table in the internet industry. And if you're watching in 2025, we're also doing drone policy.
Way too late.
I think that's an interesting question. I mean, I think, looking through the political lens, all politics are local, and kind of the approach that we take with the issues that we bring, we want to make sure that elected officials see our companies and our users as a constituent interest. If you're a senator from a big agricultural state, you care about the farmers and the crops and all that, and you may not have a Facebook or a Google or a Yelp based in your district or your state, but all of your constituents and voters care about the internet, they care about internet issues, they're using Facebook, they're using Google, they're using TripAdvisor, Yelp, other services, and they care about what happens in the policy debate. And I think that's what you saw with SOPA and PIPA, and that's what you'll see for other issues when the internet users see a threat to
Yes.
the services they're using and the platform. They're going to speak out just like.
But now I guess Macon's saying, as an association like yours, you have a usual regular lever to pull, which is a letter signed by all the companies sent to the relevant committee chairs or something, or the president or the administration. There's a special lever, break glass in case of emergency, which is change the homepage of Google, put the funereal shroud around a Wikipedia entry and divert the users there. And I hear Macon asking, how frequently and under what circumstances will that special lever get pulled?
You know, the great thing about the internet is there's incredible competition, and the user really is king. And so it's not this top-down where internet companies are always saying, okay, users, you need to care about this. It's what matters to the users. And you know, competition on the internet, unlike probably any other part of our economy, it's a click away. It's very easy to switch from one site to another or use whatever's interesting to you. And so our companies and our industry is very responsive to what the interests of the user community are. In a lot of these cases, it's individual internet users saying this is something we care about, and that's what matters.
So let me just pick right up on that, trying to think what might be the next issue where you'd break glass and pull the lever and rally directly. Would it be over government surveillance?
I think that's an important issue. I mean, clearly, I mean, Joel made a great point on these transparency reports. It's something that users care about, and our companies and our industry have been really the leaders on shining a light on government practices and standing up and defending their users.
Yes.
The platforms are all global, so it's not just about users in the United States, about the users around the world, and it's something that I think our companies have shown real leadership on.
Yes, Lorelei.
Thank you. I'm just going to give sort of an institutionally empathetic perspective on capacity.
Tell us who you are.
My name is Lorelei Kelly. I'm with XLab, which is a new organization inside the New America Foundation. We are looking at building the next generation of technical platforms for public problem solving. I work on Congress and how to. So here we go. Who watches House of Cards? So Congress isn't organized enough to be that awful. It is an old jalopy with the hood up right now, trying to drive on a modern highway.
It's just a country legislature.
It is. And one of the things I'm delighted about this meeting right now is to bring the technology policy community, especially the commercial interests, into a conversation about long game policies and not just showing up when they're mad about something.
So what would crystallize the ask you'd want to make to this group?
I would ask that you invest in a new kind of, I don't know, I wouldn't call it necessarily think tank, but kind of new kinds of knowledge brokering to create a decision support system that's enabled by technology for decision making in the policy arena, which is not crowdsourcing. It's much more curation. It's much more showing up at the right place at the right time. I mean, all information is not created equally. Right now, if we don't figure out a way to flip the big data revolution into a competitive political constituency for evidence, we're not going to have a legislature that makes policy based on the best knowledge available, for
Let me
example.
just unpack that. The big data revolution to be able to be used to produce evidence. You mean by that, thanks to big data, there's lots more we can know about the world and about people, and not just what kind of cat food they are likely to buy.
Exactly, but there are not necessarily on-ramps into the policymaking process right now that are useful. Oh, excuse me, yeah. Or that show up at the right place at the right time. I mean, disruptive, just let's face it, the language between California and Washington, D.C. is crazy, and hackers are artists on the West Coast. They're looked at as criminals in D.C. I mean, disruption is a business plan in San Francisco. It's a national security threat in Washington. I mean, there's huge capacity problems inside government right now, simply apprehending the scale of the change.
Is there a classic case study where you could imagine this being applied, just so we can be concrete? What would an
Okay, I'll give you an example. So
Yeah.
over the last 5 years, I was on the Hill for 10 years, and we didn't even have LCD screens or really basic technical competence inside committee hearings.
Yeah.
What if we created a way to create data predictive modeling or probability modeling or context modeling inside markups while they're voting on amendments? So you have a way to hold members accountable for decisions they're making in the moment about the outcomes for society at large. I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you can enable.
If I put the word "not" into this sentence, this will tell me what will change. This is how many people
Well,
die.
I mean, I don't even think a no. It's
Yeah.
very important to say that right now, it's not the quality. I mean, Congress has a huge data quality problem. Let's face it. But we don't want to get into the fight about the credibility of the data as much as the quality of it. And I'm fine with co-locating the data in a place that a committee chair will actually listen to it,
Yes.
which is from their district.
Yes.
I mean, it's that kind of mapping
Yeah.
that gets through just gets into the inbox that's not
Yeah.
happening right now. It's really not
Yeah.
that complicated. It's that this community, I think, is thinking like sort of information
Yeah.
is the answer. It's not. It's
Great.
going to always be
Let me
relationships.
stop you there and turn to Bruce Schneier. Bruce, I want to ask you crisply, first, after introducing yourself, how worried should the average internet user be about government surveillance in particular in 2014? Use whatever units you think appropriate. And second, do you have a view on whether there is a way to deploy new technologies, new ways of sorting and searching and presenting information to actually help fix the broken jalopy of Congress?
So I'm Bruce Schneier. I work in security and technology and policy and a lot of these issues. You know, it's a complicated question, and you know, to be crisp, I think we have to be very worried about surveillance in general, whether it's government and corporate, simply because it's a new way of organizing society where everything is recorded and used and reused and saved. And the policy implications of that really haven't been thought through. We've kind of backed into surveillance just from carrying a cell phone or using a search engine without really thinking about what the ramifications are. Policy fixes, I think, are going to come not directly, but from the side. You know, we really don't see appetite in Congress, really in many countries, to attack these problems head on. Europe more than the United States, but even so, not much. And I look more towards some of the regulatory agencies, some of the different ways you can get policy which is informed by technology into action that doesn't require legislators. So I tend to be near-term pessimistic and long-term optimistic. And I'll leave you tantalizing at that point.
And a lot of the companies present around the table right now are themselves, on behalf of their users, newly sensitized to maintaining a certain distance from government, securing user data. I'm curious, is there any ask you would make around the table, or are they pretty much seized of the issue right now and working on it?
Well, but right now the issue is in the forefront, I mean, there's a fundamental public-private surveillance partnership. I mean, the companies that are fighting government surveillance want to do it themselves. It's not, Google's not saying, we don't like surveillance. Google's saying, well, that's our job, go away to governments. So, I mean, yes, there are, you know, we need to get to the point where the users want business models that don't have surveillance, right? When DuckDuckGo surpasses Google in search engine traffic, you know we've won. I mean, before that, there isn't really the
or
appetite.
when its policy or something like it is adopted.
Right,
would
or you
happen
go in,
far earlier,
or you
yes.
or you go in through policy. I mean,
Yeah.
we're at the point where technology can trump policy, and policy
Yes.
can trump technology.
Got it. Let me ask Althea. Where are you, Althea? Hello.
Hi.
Tell us where you're from, and given the sort of posture of the company you're working with and its sort of place in the industry, how much do these issues of surveillance, whether in relation to the government, I'm trying to figure out what sort of request the government would make of Etsy. We need to know where that scarf came from. But on maybe the corporate surveillance side that Bruce was rather incendiarily striking the tinder on, how much are you concerned about user privacy in the commerce you facilitate?
Right. So I'm with Etsy. We're an online marketplace where you can buy and sell handmade goods and also vintage goods. And for us, the government surveillance issue is not, as you sort of implied, as much of an issue. We just don't have government knocking on our door all that often, which is great. So it lets us not worry about that as much. On the user privacy piece, for us, it's really a matter of building and maintaining trust with our user base. And so when we're making decisions about how to use data internally, we just gut check ourselves. If I, is that creepy for me? If I knew that was happening for me, would I find that creepy? And I think that's important for us because we know that if we use the data that we collect about our
Yes.
users in a way that would lose trust with our consumer base, they're going to go
Yes.
somewhere else. And so that's
Yes.
sort of how we do police ourselves, I guess.
I once went to Hormel Foods in Austin, Minnesota, and met their bacon taster. This is a guy whose job was to taste bacon all day long.
Great
And
job.
at some point he'd go like, it was best before today. And they'd stamp the package and be like, now we know. So it sounds like you could just have internal to Etsy the like, that policy, it was best if it weren't that way.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Well then, so maybe I should put it out to some of the other companies, again, voluntary question before I call on someone, maybe from Yelp or something. How broken, if at all, is the model of data gathering and usage that in many ways drives the free internet? Maybe less so the transactional internet, but you get the free information, somebody's got to pay for all this stuff. Advertising has a storied history back to free television. Is this model, you just need to adjust it to deal with the occasional creepiness, or is there something fundamentally worrisome about it? So Laurent, why don't I put it to you?
Sure. Laurent Crenshaw with Yelp. Ultimately, I would say, at least at this point in 2014, I don't think that it's broken. I'll just put that out there. Yelp is a platform that connects people to the local businesses that are around them. So if you, whether it be a restaurant or a dry cleaner or wherever, if you want to find out the best of whatever in your location, you can go on to Yelp and look at other sort of, user reviews and content that's posted and see a rating of it.
And how does Yelp make its money?
Through advertising. We do it, though, basically, we get businesses to purchase ad packages on Yelp, and if you're searching for a dry cleaner, if you're searching for a restaurant of some
You have
kind,
two lists. Here are the good dry cleaners, and here are the ones that pay us.
well,
and they're marked. They're carefully
right.
marked.
It carefully says that it's marked as an advertisement, so
Yes.
that the user knows, and so we try to do everything that we can to eliminate any sort of confusion that's there. But at the same time, we go through. That's how we, make our revenue through that manner. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. From our sense, it's not necessarily about collecting a ton of information about the user, though. I mean, in essence, it's very simple to set up a Yelp account. You need, your first name, the first initial of your last name, your date of birth, and an email address. And so that's, anything that you sort of want to put in after that is up to the user themselves.
And is the data you're collecting, I guess the targeting happens quite naturally. You're looking for the dry cleaner in this area, boom. Are you doing targeting on the basis of inferences about a user rather than just on a search?
Well, it's really, from our standpoint, we want to be able to tell the business and to provide the most useful information to the business about who's going there. So it's a matter of how many people might be going to that page and looking at it.
What demographics could you give them to say old people really like your dry cleaning, young people not so much?
Sure,
Something
things
like
along
that.
those lines, right? Just generally speaking, Nielsen and other companies have put out various metrics sort of saying that, the vast majority of Yelp users are, college graduates. They are, most of them are in the sort of 25 to 50 range and make, over X amount a year. So, and also, generally speaking, we've sort of been able to show that within a period of time, like within a week, you go on a Yelp because you want to buy something. You want to spend money. And so those are metrics that we're able to take to business owners to say, here's why that you should get advertising on our platform.
Got it. So let me ask you, Lee Freund, from the point of view of your company, which we're about to hear about, basically +1, or difference from what Laurent just described?
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Lee Freund. I'm the head of global public policy for AOL, which was and is an online media company that has reinvented itself many times and was a lot of things and is a lot of things. So we make our money primarily from advertising as well. And I would add to what Laurent said we talk a lot about privacy at AOL, and I think Joel talked about transparency in terms of government requests we get. Transparency for our users is the way we get their trust. So in our privacy policy, we try to make things easy to read. We try to give people options if they don't want to be targeted on
How many
advertising.
pages is the privacy policy?
It's much shorter as of September 15th. So it's
a provocative answer. All the fat has been removed from the privacy policy.
The
No more
legalese, right?
consonants.
But what we try to do is make it pretty clear. Facebook, I've read through privacy policies on Facebook and Yahoo, and we all try to do the same thing, which is to give people information about the type of data we collect and the type of data we use. And one of the things I think that's an important consideration is the way we distinguish between personally identifiable information that says, I'm Michael Beckerman and I live in Washington, D.C., and here's my salary and here's my social security number and my credit card information. And I'm a user who lives in Washington, D.C., who searches golf equipment, hypothetically. Right? And we use the latter in an aggregate form. If I were to use personal information to target Michael Beckerman for an ad based on click-through rates and the millions of impressions that we need to serve for our advertisers to make any money, it would not be a successful strategy. So aggregating all of the information that Laurent was talking about and all of the information about user behavior to serve them targeted advertising is I think something that a lot of the companies around the table do. But one of the things that we try to do in a reasonable way is give transparency to our users and choices about whether or not they want to be targeted. So you've got an opportunity to opt out of that type of data collection and targeting. And I think that there's always a balancing in our industry between privacy and free internet, as you spoke.
Let me stop you there. But it sounds like an enthusiastic, basically, plus one. And let me see if we can make it a viral sensation by turning to Margaret Nagel. Same idea here?
Sure. Margaret Nagel with Yahoo. I head up our U.S. government affairs, and we're a company that provides. Really, we're trying to meet users' daily habits every day: weather, sports, finance, email. And I would plus one absolutely to the comments already said. I think the other thing that you're starting to see a lot of on the privacy front, it's an issue that most of the companies, if not all of the companies around this table, are dealing with every day, because it goes back to what Althea said in terms of if our users don't trust us, they're not going to continue to use our service. So we are always trying to ensure that what we're doing is something that the users are going to be comfortable with, they're going to understand, and they're going to be clear. I think one of the things that the companies are now all doing is starting to, I won't necessarily say compete on privacy, but I think people are starting to see privacy as a way to differentiate their product and to talk to users about privacy more directly. And so one of the things that you're seeing a lot of is sort of contextual privacy notices and trying to make sure that when you're on an app, you're seeing what's happening on that app, not what's happening on the Yahoo website. When you're interacting with an advertisement, you're going to see privacy notices about the kind of data that is informing that advertisement. When you're seeing news that is specifically, or sports teams that are, you're seeing on our sports website, you're seeing your favorite football team, maybe the Redskins. There's going to be a way for you to understand why you're getting that information versus other information that's in context. And I think that's one of the areas where you're seeing sort of development and trying to make that communication more clear with the user.
Let me ask you, in the point about competition, which is a way, even getting back to Bruce Schneier's point about, well, DuckDuckGo is there, and if people want it and enough people use it, others would model that kind of privacy policy. So you're suggesting that here as well. To what extent, if I'm just the average internet user, might something I'm doing on Yahoo implicate something I see on AOL or on Yelp? Are there ways in which the information about me to facilitate advertising is moving among the sites quite commonly right now? Or is it basically stovepiped? You glean what you can on your users, and those tokens are not mappable when I'm a user on another site?
There are circumstances where what is happening on one site is being, that information is being used on other sites as well. That sort of mapping that happens is, at least for Yahoo, always disclose the partners that we work with and that we have relationships with other websites. That's clearly disclosed in our privacy policy. When it's related to advertising,
Yes.
there are, in the advertisements, you can click and you can sort of see who the partners are, and
Yes.
we try to make that very clear to users because we understand that that's something
Yep.
that they would want to understand. I can't speak to every other internet company and how they handle sort of relationships with third parties, but
Yep.
but that.
And on the
That's how we
regulatory
handle it.
front, do you see anything coming down the pike from government, or is this pretty as stable as these equilibria get? The jalopy is not chasing you.
I think that it is. I don't think the jalopy is chasing us. I think it
It's a
is
weird
an issue.
metaphor, I realize.
I think it is.
Must outrun the jalopy.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is something that, because so many people use technology and they are seeing the ways that it is being integrated into our daily life, I think that it is something that everyone is paying a lot of attention to.
Yes.
And I think there is right now a lot of attention on it. There is a lot of oversight, which is appropriate.
Yes.
Whether or not that's going to lead to legislation in the immediate future or regulation in the immediate future, I'm not sure. But I think the dialogue and the conversation and the oversight
Yep.
is important. And you're seeing a lot of the companies work together on self-regulatory efforts. And I think, so I think there are sort of best practices and things that will move forward maybe more quickly than legislation or regulation, but it's certainly an issue that we're all very focused on.
Yep. Todd, was that you wanting to jump in?
Jonathan, though, I think in the future we're going to see this change from you're still positing it as a person interface site world that we're living in, and we're really moving to what I call the pig pen world, in which you as a person with your device carry around all your data, and all around you people are seeking data about you and for you.
And the
So
data
there's-
may not literally be in the device, otherwise I'll be sad if I lose it, but what you're saying is the authority to release it may be much more interactive rather than a one-time, did I agree to that policy 5 years ago? It will be, somebody is wanting to know X about you right now. How do you feel about that?
I walk into a Starbucks, I've got my Starbucks app. They
Yeah.
know who I am when I walk into the store.
Yes.
They say, oh, here's your coffee that you like, Todd. It's already prepared for you. So it's no more of I want to go to that
Wait, let's
place.
just check in with Etsy. How's the creepy meter on that?
It's creepy.
Oh. All right, no coffee for you. But we'll get over that, and then you'll be able to stride into the Starbucks and just, in fact, they'll have a lamppost a block away. You'll stride past the lamppost, so the coffee will be hot when you arrive at the Starbucks.
Or it'll say, you'll walk by the lamppost and it'll say, hey, there's a Starbucks right here. Isn't it time for you to have your Starbucks? Right? Or if you use Waze, Google service, it'll ask you at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when you say, I want to search for a location to go to, it'll say, are you going home now?
Yes.
Because it'll automatically place that you're going home now. So I
Yes.
do think that we're moving to and it's whether deliberate or not, we all are going to end up as Pigpen, which is carrying a whole bunch of our data all around us, and people are going to be pulling from it all the time.
Be the best metaphor.
It may not. I agree. That's part of the creepy side of it.
But
I
one
just
thing
have
I
this
would
vision
add,
of Pigpen being chased by a jalopy, and it's just, yes,
one thing I would add on that though is
Yeah.
that's it may be creepy to Althea, but
Yes.
I would love that if every time I walked into Starbucks, my cup of coffee that I always order was ready and I didn't
Yes.
have to wait in line. And so I think that's where the user choosing to put that app on its phone,
Which is kind
or
of funny to
choosing to
imagine the
consent to
Starbucks of
that.
the future one where
Right.
just people are coming in and grabbing stuff, and if you're a third party from 2014 looking at this, you're like, what's going on? Right. And I guess if we can RFID-ify money, put an RFID chip on it, so it's kind of like pushing the grocery cart through the supermarket turnstile, and it just adds up all your stuff because it's all tagged, and that's that. You could just grab buckets of money at the bank. It'd be left out in the lobby, just money, and you just walk out the door, and it would check you out. It would be like, okay, that was $272.
Why would you even need money at that point?
So that you could stage walking into a bank and grabbing buckets of money. What are you talking about?
John,
So
you may
would
not
know
want
how
to try
much
that in
fill your
2014.
bathtub with. Yes, yes. Sorry. Yep.
I was just
Matt.
jumping on. I think it speaks back to this sort of the generational shift.
Yes.
And societal tolerance for those kinds of issues. Like you think about, I do think about. Remember the seamless sharing apps about 3 or 4 years ago, which I personally loved.
Yes.
And the Washington Post had one, and there were several others. and they would seamlessly share after one-time authorization your Netflix viewing
Yes.
or your news reading. But by and large, users, I'm told anyway, kind of got creeped out by that, and so they kind of de-emphasized that.
But
for
you
now.
are suggesting it's generational. So
But
Starbucks will
but I do
basically have
believe-
young people walking in, grabbing their coffees, and old people in line.
Well, I don't necessarily think it's old people about age, but it's like
Yeah.
as our society, old people and young people get more used to things, and
Yes.
you can move the ball slightly forward.
Yes.
And I do believe that things like that that today sound creepy.
Yes.
In 5 years or 10 years or 15 years,
Yes.
may sound just.
Now we're talking a
fact.
lot at this point about the melding of physical infrastructure and the internet out there. And walking down the street of a city, I can't help but think of wanting to turn to Joshua. Tell us where you're from and how much of your day-to-day as a CIO of a public entity is about just keeping the trains running on time on the desktops of the employees of the city versus thinking about what role there might be in public infrastructure to support the kind of vision Todd is talking about.
Sure. My name is Yasha Franklin Hodge. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the City of Boston, formerly a small colony of Puritans just down the river from here, and now the hub of our regional economy. So, it's an interesting question, and I think certainly much of my job does consist of making sure that the trains run, that the computers work. That having been said, I think as a city, we are often where the rubber meets the road on, sometimes quite literally, on some of the more innovative technologies that are being developed when it comes to things like transportation, things like lodging. We have, as an organization, I think, very legitimate public policy interests at play when it comes to these kinds of new innovative technologies. And so, while we are less in the realm of privacy and intermediary liability as a policy matter, we do have to think about things like public safety. We have to think about things like liability and protection of landlords and of individuals who are participating in some of these new and innovative services. And so I think the challenge that we run into, and there's a shift that I think is happening, which is we've gone from a place of in many municipalities being reflexively no to new technology and new things that are disruptive, to one where we actually believe we have an obligation to try to support the innovation economy, to work with companies that are doing innovative things, and find ways to meet our public policy needs and our public policy objectives in a very practical sense. And the challenge that we face right now is often that there's not necessarily great models for this that really do address those challenges at the local level, and that's what we're struggling to do, is to work with companies, but really with all stakeholders in this conversation, to make sure that we're developing policies that are smart and don't just shut down things that should be given room to grow.
And how much of your concern within a municipal government has to do with what something Joel alluded to, which was getting internet available to everybody? And I can't help but ask, to put it on the table, how much would something like net neutrality be something in which something like the city of Boston would have a stake?
Yeah.
Would Boston have a view on net neutrality?
Boston does have a view on net neutrality. Our mayor has signed on with the U.S. Conference of Mayors statement encouraging our various regulatory agencies to support and preserve net neutrality. I think we look at it from a couple of different angles. One is that we are a center of the innovation economy, so we are, we think it's important for the businesses that are based in and around Boston to be able to thrive, to have an open internet. We are also look at it as a question of equity and of ensuring that our citizens have. We view access to affordable broadband as being a core equity issue within our cities, and something that we have some oversight into in how we think about our policies. So, for us, we want to make sure that when a citizen goes online, whether they're doing business with the city, whether they're accessing educational information, whether they're working on looking for job opportunities, trying to start a business, that they have the connectivity and the bandwidth that they need to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And so I think as a result of that, we have skin in the game on
And
this.
is there a hunger to produce municipal fiber or get the city into the broadband business?
I think that we are committed to ensuring that every resident of Boston has access to affordable high-speed broadband internet access. There's a lot of different ways to solve that problem. I don't think we have figured out the right, the definitively right answer for that. I
Yes.
don't think we're where we need to be. And
Yes.
certainly for our most underconnected residents, there's not a lot of great options right now. But we are looking at ways to encourage increased adoption of broadband.
Anybody else want to weigh in on the net neutrality front?
I don't want to weigh in on net neutrality, but I want
Yeah.
to go back to sort of the first question that you asked, Joshua, just
Yes.
in regards to internet and technology adoption within a city in particular. And I think that sort of to take the general premise of, will governments break the internet and sort of flip it around, I think that I, want to say that the internet can really help governments to do their job better. That's sort of what Lorelei was talking about a little bit earlier, but we have tremendous amounts of data that we continue to get on a daily basis about millions and millions of users. And I think that one of the things that a lot of our companies do already and will continue to further do in the future is figure out ways to package this data that can be helpful and useful to government entities, whether they be local, state, or federal.
Does Yelp offer for rating various government instrumentalities like anything else?
You can basically go on to Yelp and rate any general place. We don't.
Joshua, how much are you worried about optimizing, City of Boston, 4.5 stars. Decent harbor would come again, but,
Our parking clerk's office is not faring so well on your service, I'm afraid to say.
So is there something that could be done here so that the parking clerk, is it a feedback issue or a different issue with the parking clerk?
I don't think anybody is going to the parking clerk for a good time. I think. Look, it's certainly in terms of how we do service delivery. We're thinking a lot about how we use data, and some of that is about really using the data that we have, that we collect in more strategic ways within our organization. How are we using it to manage? How are we using it to set targets? How are we using it to create accountability? How are we creating transparency with the public? And I think we're interested not only in the data sets that we have, but also the ones that exist out there in the public and how we can interact with that in an effective way.
Got it.
I mean, for us, it's less thinking about how many stars we have on Yelp or another rating service, but more thinking about, are we delivering good services and are we holding ourselves accountable to that? And I think there's a lot of different ways that we can use technology, public and private, to do that.
Yes. Matt Hindeman.
Matt Heinemann. I'm a professor at George Washington University and a fellow at the Shorenstein Center here at Harvard. In thinking about the question of whether government can actually break the internet, I think the answer is no, because the internet as a peer-to-peer network is already broken and has been for quite some time. So the notion of a peer-to-peer network where my computer, my website is treated equally to all other networks was true right up until about 2007 and 2008. And up to that point, when I put something online, when Amazon put something online, we both had to pretty much take the same path over the internet.
And now Amazon writes a check or builds its own delivery network, and you can't.
So now the vast majority of web traffic never touches the public backbone. Instead of having to go through little regional networks and then up through several hops through the main national fiber networks and back down and then all the way back, taking dozens of hops along the way, now when I request a Netflix video or I do a Google search, it's just a few hops. And instead of using the backbone, there's a direct fiber connection between Comcast and Google. And the reason why this has all happened is because we are all very, very sensitive to tiny slowdowns in latency.
So is this kludge, maybe I shouldn't call it a kludge, is this
It's now the basic structure, the de facto structure of how the internet works.
So is this something of which policymakers should be seized, or should it be, see, the system works? the bits get to where they're going, and then we can see House of Cards.
I think the real concern is less about bandwidth, which is mostly what policymakers have been talking about, and much more about latency. There is the single best established fact about web traffic is that higher latency, waiting just a fraction of a second longer between when you click that button and when the page loads, it's impossible to build an online audience without having a blazingly fast site. And Google has spent billions and billions of dollars just to be about a quarter of a second faster. And so the concern is that isn't so much YouTube or Netflix, which, you know, if they have to pay up for more bandwidth, they will.
Yes.
The concern is that if Comcast is in the situation of being able to force everybody else to pay for latency, that's not just about Google or Netflix or online video. That's about every single newspaper site in
So
America.
we hear that. Where do you park that concern? Is that something you want to talk to Matt Lira about and say, wake up, Congress, you need to do X? Or is it something for which you want to invoke the industry? Where do we take that concern?
I think that it has to be a concern that's present both in the corporate boardroom, in the Federal Communications Commission, in the Federal Trade Commission, and absolutely in the halls of Congress.
But I'm saying they're all listening to you. What do you want them to do?
I think that the most important principle is making sure that people don't and small carriers, especially small information content providers, don't have to pay to have the same latency that Amazon or Google does.
And would that be effectuated through a kind of net neutrality regime?
Yeah, but a net neutrality focused much more on latency rather than on bandwidth. Making sure that making sure that if I have my own upstart bookshop online, that runs roughly as fast as Amazon's does.
And is there anything you would ask of the supranational entities, the internet governance entities, such as they are? Is there a job for ICANN here, or is that just nothing to see here, folks?
I'm not sure that this is ICANN's issue, but it's absolutely something that regulators in Europe and around the world should pay attention to. The notion that if Comcast and because there's no competition for truly high-speed internet, you really do have what Comcast is quite explicitly trying to do is to become a market maker, or essentially to become the mafia.
Yes.
Right? The ability to say, well, you know, nice website you got here. Shame if it ran half a second slower than everybody else's website.
It is funny, when people start making mafia
metaphors,
metaphors, I then want to turn to the representative from Comcast.
Okay.
But we don't have one. But let me ask, among the barons that have the billions to not have this be a problem, are you guys basically sitting pretty, or are you concerned about the future of the infrastructure that delivers bits between you and your customers? Joel, can I just put it to you real quick, or?
Sure. Yeah, of course we're concerned about it. I think my guess is most of the companies around the table are concerned about it.
Yeah.
And we have on net neutrality broadly taken the position through our Internet Association that it's something that the FCC needs to address and needs to preserve. I agree with Matthew that latency is a huge issue for users, particularly in the developed world.
Yes.
Where they have most people have access, and they are, they're now to the next stage of wanting access as fast as possible. Other parts of the world, that's actually not the issue.
Yes.
There's only about 1/3 of the world that has internet connection, and the bigger challenge in huge parts of the world is to get to that first step, which is access, which is to get them online at all.
Yes.
And that's something we're very focused on through internet.org.
And how do you think through the quite natural possibility that when you get them online, you'll get them online in a mode that says, we're going to give you Facebook, Wikipedia, a few other things that we curate. Anything else, let's wait till you can pay for it. How do you think through that form of what I gather is a non-neutral net you're providing, but at no cost? So, I don't know, how do you think through what that would look like to somebody? Is it a good thing if somebody might think, the internet? Yeah, that's that thing that's Facebook and Wikipedia.
Yeah, about 85% of the people in the world live within wireless coverage. But as I said, only about 1/3 of the world is online.
Yes.
So there's a huge delta there that needs to be filled and can be filled it's not an infrastructure problem particularly, it's an awareness problem. So what are the benefits I can get from being online?
Yes.
And it's a cost problem that they just can't afford data.
Yes.
So one of the things we in cooperation with some governments and some other companies, operators, websites are trying to do is figure out, are there business models and ways where you can address both the awareness issue and the cost issue? And one of them is by providing some free basic services. So about a month ago, Internet.org rolled out an app in Zambia, which provides a suite of basic services. Yes, Facebook's on there, but so is Wikipedia. And so are a number of maternal health organizations.
Yeah, that's the curated stuff I was referring to.
Right, and things that are extraordinarily important to get to the people in that country. And we'll see how it works. And so, so far, it's early. There's good interest and take up in it, and that's a way to start addressing the access problem. And so, we think that's a good thing.
Yes, no, it's just interesting to see. It almost just suggests a path from, if you have no internet, non-neutral internet, not such a terrible alternative, as a path ultimately maybe to a neutral net.
I think there are issues that we're properly focused on in the United States and other areas in the developing world that will and at some point be important in the developing world as well.
Yes.
But there are some threshold issues.
You've just got to get them online.
You got to get them
somehow.
online, and you got to
Yep.
get them to see the value of connection and connectivity, and that's something we're focused on.
Let me give Philip Kent an opportunity to weigh in.
No, I mean, I'm the last person on earth who's going to defend Comcast. I was the recently retired CEO of Turner Broadcasting, and I spent the greater part of a decade at war with Comcast. But I do think it needs to be recognized that these companies, whether it's Time Warner or other, have made a massive investment in infrastructure. It is not a public resource. They are entitled to make money on it, they have to respond to the marketplace too. And I'm going to voice a bigger concern I think that we should all have about companies like Comcast in a minute, going back to privacy. But
we don't have a minute.
Okay, but they have they have to respond to the marketplace, and they can't afford to have people not be able to get to certain sites. I mean, they actually roll their eyes when people say to them, well, you're going to discriminate against me.
And that's true even if they're pretty much the only broadband game in town.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I'm very personally, as a citizen now and out of the industry, I'm really frightened about the implications of their growing size and power. But the one thing we spent half an hour on privacy, nobody ever mentioned the cable industry, the cable operators. I mean, these new generation of set-top boxes are capable of obtaining and keeping and using all of this private information that everyone's worried about.
Connect watches you.
I mean, your cable. If you have a new generation set-top box, they know every show you've watched every minute of the day. Nobody talks about that. They only talk about Facebook and Yahoo and Google.
Just a quick
I'm amazed
question
at
there,
that.
just on really getting to the reality of internet in 2014. Many people would be saying, television, cable? All I need is broadband. What, a set-top box? What the hell is a set-top box? Or is it, no, the name of the game for a company like Comcast is ultimately cable, telephony, specialized services for which maybe broadband is only the loss leader.
It's all of it. Broadband's probably, I haven't looked at it, they make a lot more money on it now. There's much higher margin. The video, because of the strength of the programming companies like my former company, ESPN, their margins have gone down, but that's really how they started. But they, the potential of what these boxes can do, both good and bad. I mean, good for advertising and bad for privacy, something which I'm just amazed there isn't more discussion of.
Yes. We are almost out of time. I want to give the handful of people whom I've had yet to call on and had yet to weigh in a moment to say something. Together, we who have not spoken, leaving out myself, bring us in for a landing here. Is there something we've missed, or is there anything we've covered for which there's something vital you want to add? John Wybe.
I come at it from a news media perspective, and I kind of echo some of Matt's concerns. It remains the case that media organizations, no matter how maligned they are these days, and the business models is having a lot of trouble, but provide a huge amount of the civically important information in the United States. And I do fear that a lot that, you know, in a metered internet situation, in a non-neutrality situation, that we could lose a great deal of that civically important information.
And is there anything, given the title of our panel, you would ask of government? Subsidy? Write us a check like the National Endowment? Let there be a National Endowment for Journalism?
You know, sort of public spectrum for the public good. You know, maybe a sort of big media merger tax. You know, we've sort of thrown around the idea of kind of nonprofit fast lanes or sort of some version of that. So I just throw those
Now,
out.
get C-SPAN faster than ever. Can't have latency on the Agriculture Committee.
Yeah.
Jonathan.
I really should not be saying this about C-SPAN. We're on C-SPAN. Bless you.
Hi.
Alex, sir.
Alex Jones. I'm the director of the Shorenstein Center on Media Politics and Public Policy. A couple of things are in the news today that I think bear on this. One is that the lawsuit against Yelp in San Francisco that charged effectively that Yelp was shaking down advertisers and threatening them with lower rankings if they did not buy advertising
I'm
packages.
sure Laurent is ready to make an apology.
The thing
and
is,
say they won't do
that
it
was
again.
that was totally thrown out. I mean, Yelp said, you know,
right.
we didn't do it. But the point is that the court said it doesn't matter whether you did it or not. You can do it. You can do any damn thing you please with that information. And it turns the whole issue of a company's ownership of data and what they do with it and how they use it entirely into a First Amendment
Which
issue.
may set, and we have another panel coming up as an agenda there, are there things we could imagine the companies subscribing to? Lorena's like, we would never do that, and therefore maybe we don't need a law preventing it, but something that would, a privacy policy, say we will never do it and sue us if we do.
Well, as I understand this decision, basically that's the argument and that's what the court bought.
But a company can make it so that they are suable. They don't like to, but they can if they want to
And
make
just
a
to be
promise.
clear, though,
Yes.
you know, from Yelp's perspective, there's never been any amount of money that you could pay in order that a business could pay to influence the overall.
And if I
reviews.
had a
It's done
small
separately
tablet
via an
of
algorithm.
wet cement and a stylus, would Yelp be willing to write into that tablet in a way that the lawyers around the table could make binding a commitment to that through 2025?
It's always been our commitment since the
Yes?
company has been founded,
And
that's
every
really,
day the farmer comes to the chicken and feeds it.
But ultimately, to Alex's point, the court really didn't even have to get to the point of addressing whether or not, you know, what that claim that we made was
That's
true.
Alex's point. That's what
exactly.
Alex is saying.
Yes.
But so I'm asking, can you imagine as a company promising for the future that it will resemble the past in that way?
Generally speaking, I would say that most companies have an ethos that they were founded on and that they follow, and that's certainly been one of the core ethoses of Yelp as a
Yes.
corporation. So I would, you know, without sort of
We're not going to move a car off this lot
Right,
today.
we're not-
I get
yeah,
that.
exactly,
But
exactly.
it's something you'd be willing to consider, and it might bear. It brings us full circle to the beginning of the panel when I had a colloquy with Joel about the Facebook feed, and Joel's pointing out, look, we might get rid of stuff under the AUP, but we're not messing with the feed. That's at least what I heard you saying. One might wonder, could that amount to a commitment of some kind in the future or not? Obviously, we're not going to move a car off this lot today, but that might be very interesting to think about to bridge the gap that Alex is invoking.
Well, my sense is that even though Yelp and other companies would not do it, I'm not accusing anyone, they would argue in court for their right to do it because they have First Amendment rights. That's the way they're interpreting them, and I think that is something that is going to be
But
a
one
real
could
issue.
establish a sort of reputational stake in something. The way that, I don't know if Google regrets it, you know, don't be evil, is a way of saying, come at us, public, if we let you down, even if it are in our ways in which that are not legally cognizable.
Well, that would be the theory, but I think that given the plethora of ways of looking at this issue, the right to do exactly what you want to with the data you collect is an interesting question
Yes.
that the courts are going to have to,
Absolutely.
no question, have to deal with.
Alex, thank you for that intervention. Wonderful. Adam, let me turn to you for any. We're over time now, but
I just wanted to say Adam Connor, Vice President of Politics at Brigade, which in 2014 is a
a new startup in civic and political engagement that we haven't launched a product yet. But for the eyes of C-SPAN and history in 2024, as you're aware, dominant market share leader, change the world, save government, and
Buy now.
just get in early, people.
Ground floor
So just
opportunity.
with the eyes of the world upon you.
Thank you, Adam. We have the total spirit of the startup represented here as well. Catherine, a pass, and Nancy, a pass. Nico, you're going to get the last word if you want.
I will reserve the balance of my time for the subsequent session.
Will everybody please join me in thanking our panel for listening. We stand adjourned until 11 a.m.
I'd love to.
That's how you get the